Hey guys, can you guys hear me just fine? I'm just setting up the Instagram one. Let's see. All right, yeah. So the Instagram one's up. The YouTube one should be up as well. And yeah, let's start this up. Hey, all right. Hey everyone that's joining. Yeah, so this is going to be learn photography with me. It's going to be every weekend. Same times, Saturday and Sundays. So Saturday it's going to be learn photography and ask me questions. Sunday's going to be edit with me, so I will upload a raw file and a JPEG, and we can work on the photo together. So I thought this was something fun to do, and it could pass some time for a lot of us that are kind of stuck at home these days. And I'll be just doing some editing work. If I get any questions, I'll answer them, and yeah, let's have some fun. So, yeah, the most popular questions I get is what camera do I use? And for people who are starting to venture into photography, I personally suggest maybe the Sony A6000. It's one of the it's one of the cropped mirrorless cameras. It's pretty. The price is very affordable, as well as the image quality is pretty good as well. I think it's 24 megapixels, and then it also records in 4K, so it can do video and photos. So um, it's pretty convenient for everything. Since when you're starting photography, you kind of want to try everything out to see which one you prefer and which one you like the most. And later on, if you think you really enjoy photography, I would recommend you to get maybe a camera like the Sony A7 III, because you don't really need the R series because that's only for megapixels. And if you're just planning to do Instagram or YouTube or anything that's kind of computer based and not for printing, then the A7 III is pretty much the end camera for you. And the camera body itself is, I think, around $2,000 USD, but it's not that bad since you can use it for a very, very long time. The problem is the lens. The lenses are quite expensive. So, um, let's see. So, if you're purchasing a camera body, if you're doing landscape, you might want to do a 16 to 35. But if you're also planning to do portrait and stuff, you might need a prime lens like the 50 mil. So lenses are what's expensive about photography, and but let's see, yeah. So if you're starting off and you're currently using a smartphone, um, what I would recommend is buying a A6000. It's around $400 USD. If you buy it during Boxing Day or Black Friday, it gets pretty much discounted, so you get like a bundle for around 400 USD. And if you're planning to upgrade your camera gear, I would recommend the A7 III, or you can wait for the A7 IV. That might be coming out soon. I'm not too sure, but from what I heard, the A7 III is the bang for the buck. So those are some options. And then if you're shooting landscape and you're on a full frame, a 16 to 35 is probably the what I would recommend. And depending on your budget, you might also want to pick up a 70 to 200. For me personally, I have the 24 to 70, but I don't really use it that much. So the other two lenses are what I recommend. Let's see. Yeah, so the I think yeah, so this video will be available on YouTube after. I'll just upload it after. Let's see. What are your tips to not over edit a photograph? So how to not over edit a photograph is this is um what I would do. I would actually take constant breaks. So when you're, let's say you're editing, you edit it for 30 minutes, your eyes get really used to the image. So I would go take a 5-minute break and then come back and look at the image again. You will notice a lot of, there might be some stuff that is, let's say, oversaturated or over contrasty, like something like this. But because what's with our eyes is that when we look at an image for long enough, it kind of starts to look more and more normal. So take constant breaks. And another way to make sure you don't over edit is you flip the image horizontally. And when you flip it horizontally, you actually start to notice problems, um, or specific details that you might not have noticed. Let's say this cloud piece here. Here, I didn't really see it, but when I flipped it, I can see that this was catching the center of attention. When, let's say, I want the mountain to be the center of attention, so I would actually just remove that. And how to remove that is, if you're new to Photoshop, these are the toolbars. And what I normally use to remove stuff here is the spot healing tool. The spot healing brush. And this is why I love Photoshop. It's really flexible and convenient. So you just drag it through, and the cloud's gone. And what filters I'm using? I'm currently not using any filters at all. I any neutral density or any um any like polarizers or any of that, because for my I'm not really, I have one neutral density, but it didn't really give me the results I wanted. And without using a filter, my photographs has been, I've been pretty happy with the results. So I'm not actually using any filters right now, but I plan to get some. I plan to get a, what's it called? I forgot the name, but I'm planning to get a few filters. But I'll wait till when the virus is over to actually do those. So I don't ever edit in Lightroom because Photoshop actually does what Lightroom does. Just let me show you. For anyone that's unfamiliar with Camera Raw, so what Photoshop has is a plugin called Camera Raw, which is essentially the same as Lightroom. You have all the tabs here. And what I like about this is I don't have to run two softwares at the same time. I can just edit in the plugin. I can just do what Lightroom does with this plugin, and it'll automatically import it into Photoshop without me opening up without it transferring to another software. And I personally like the Camera Raw setup more. So you just have the basic tab here, which is pretty much the same as Lightroom. And then the curves, the sharpening, everything's the same. It's just what I love about Photoshop Camera Raw is you can continue applying presets. So let me just show you. So let's say I applied this preset. For Lightroom, you would export this. At this point, to get this image, you need to export it in Lightroom. But in Photoshop, I already have it applied, which allows me to apply it again. So I can apply the same preset again, and this will make the results even more colorful or moody, you know? And for this part, the blue is a little too strong, so just lower it a bit. And you can keep doing that. And that's what I really love about Camera Raw and Photoshop is you can keep applying different presets to get even more colors, even more mood, and even more results. You don't for Lightroom you can only apply these settings once, and then you need to export it to put it back in to apply the same again. But in Photoshop, it's just so much quicker and it's so much more convenient. Even even if you just want to do small adjustments, like highlights, and you just want to increase the saturation a bit, you can just do that in Camera Raw and then click OK, and then it's automatically applied. And that's why I like Lightroom more. Yeah, so for neutral density, I don't normally photograph during the afternoons or when the light is very, very strong. So that's why I never ever need one. I normally just do sunrise and sunset, and at that point the exposure, like the shutter speed, I can actually set to my desired. I do bring one along in case I actually need it, but from my experience, I never really ever run into needing one. And especially because I don't really photograph anything during the day. So during the afternoons, I'm usually resting because I either wake up really early for those days. I wake up early for sunrise, and then I go for sunset, and I go afterwards. And any time in between is for me is mostly rest time. So that's why neutral density filters um aren't really in my essentials at the moment. But if I do plan to do more afternoon or chasing, let's say, waterfalls during the day, I'll definitely pick up more neutral density and try to use it more. But at the moment, because I'm doing sunrise and like mostly golden hour, I don't really ever run into it. But I do use neutral density for drones because a lot of times when you're flying, it's actually really bright. But other than that, yeah, let's see. All right, what should All right, let me just check through the Instagram if there's any messages. Yeah, so the Instagram screen is actually horizontal, so it's just trying to look through it. Yeah, this is Photoshop. It's not Lightroom. So if I missed any questions, you can just send it again. Sorry, just looking through everything. Oh, I'm based in Vancouver. So yeah, the Pacific Northwest. It's pretty much raining one fourth of the year, so there's a lot of um, mood here, I guess. But I'm slowly growing to not really like rain because it really ruins the colors and details of an image. And a lot of times when it's raining, the entire sky is just pure white. But yeah, I'm I'm loving sunsets and sunrises because it's really crazy how it turns a scene something like this. And I'll show you rain. So when it rains, the sky becomes pretty much detailless. And I used to really like um the overexposed sky kind of feel, but in the for the past year, I've been really liking really dynamic images. Like, and on lucky days when it rains, you get these clouds over the trees, and it's really jaw dropping. This was actually my first actual camera, and I used this was photographed at Bunton Lake. Yeah, this was my first ever trip to somewhere I thought was really grand and really epic. And what I got was a super foggy morning. The day before was raining really hard, but it it got really the sun actually came out the next day, and while we were there for the morning, like the vapor were all evaporating, I guess, and this scene was just so magical. Same was here. You can see that living in this part of the area, there's a lot of rain, and it really does make I guess forests really stand out. It gives you that really mist like magical mood, or not magical, but like I guess mysterious. So let me just check. Hey, everyone's joining. What's the program of the day? The program of the day is Photoshop. So I think if you guys want to learn Lightroom or Camera Raw, I can totally do that for future live streams. But what I plan on doing is actually focusing on Photoshop, since it's like an endless topic to cover. So today is just a question and general so today's more of answering questions for if you have any. But later on, I think I'll start structuring the live streams to we'll slowly learn Photoshop together. And for Saturdays, it will be more of a educational kind of hour. But for Sundays, I'm planning to do a edit with me. So there will before the stream before the stream goes on, I'll provide a link to download the raw file and the JPEG in case your computer or phone can't process the raw file. Then you guys can all download it and we'll just go through the editing process together. So it might take a few so every hour, every Sunday we'll just go bit by bit, and in a few weeks we'll have the image finished. So I think that'll be pretty fun to do. Let's see. Which plugins am I using? So I'm not using any plugins. The only plugin that I use is it comes with Photoshop, so just Camera Raw, which is just Lightroom. But other than that, everything I find a plugin could do, I can do in Photoshop as well. So I just learned I learned how to replicate the plugin's effects in Photoshop instead of using the plugin itself. It does take a bit longer, but I feel that it's a lot more, you understand the software more versus using a plugin. These won't be this is a 1 hour video, so I probably can't post it onto IG. After I finish this hour, the recording of the live stream will be uploaded onto my YouTube for anyone who who wants to see it again, or who wants to or who wants to just who missed it. But what I plan to do is just do some editing, and then if I see any questions, I'll answer them, and then we'll just do this for the next 40 minutes. So normally what I do for an edit image is I first align it so that it's actually not tilted. And I like to look at the histogram, because there's a lot of times when you're editing, you don't really your screen brightness is either up high or low, so your eyes you can't really trust sometimes. But looking at the histogram, it's standardized, so you know that the brightest areas is here, the darkest detail is here. So so for people on the Instagram live, you guys can see fine, right? I'm just looking at the screen. I think it's okay. And then, for YouTube Live, it should be fine. But YouTube should be a bit delayed versus Instagram. So, to continue, the second thing I do is I adjust temperature. Make sure the image is, because the camera settings, you might have captured the image a bit too warm, a bit too cold. So you want to balance that out. And this was taken during sunrise. So I think it needs to be a bit more warm. Something like that. And now we can look at the overall histogram. So I want my the brightest areas to be actually here, to be I want the image to be more dynamic, I guess. So just slide the highlights. When you do the highlights, you actually bring out the clouds. So lowering the highlights actually brings out the faded clouds, and then I raise the whites a bit. And this gives the overall brighter areas a little bit of a bump. And you can see here the blacks really faded, so you just raise the blacks a bit. And raising the shadows here won't really do that much, but we just want to make it more dynamic. And for me, I personally like to flatten my image. I like to make a really, really flat image because you can't really, you can make a detailed image and you can make a really less contrasty image, but if you can, and then you can make that image into a very, let's say, moody one, like that. But you can't turn this into, like, once you click OK, you won't be able to turn this back to this. So I'm trying to get as flat of image as possible before I do any more adjustments. So something like that, and then you can just raise the saturation a bit. And contrast here, because the image already feels really flat, I won't really change contrast. But if the image feels too much contrast, I would actually lower this. And exposure also depends. When I look at the histogram, I feel like the overall distribution of the details is okay, so I won't really change exposure. And for anyone who's not familiar with the histogram, it's just a standardized graph that shows where all your details are positioned. So the more to the left means the darker the details, more to the right, the brighter the details, and then the hills just means how much details are in that specific region. So if the hill's high, that just means that more details or more pixels are in this area. Once you're ready, you can just click OK. And one thing to note is lens correction. I personally don't do lens correction because I really like the distortion and I like the vignette. And if the image is a bit distorted, I'll fix it in Photoshop. And sharpness here, something to note. For me, if I'm using Photoshop, I keep sharpness at 0 because I'm going to sharpen it later on. But if I'm going to export this image, I would actually keep it at maybe 40, 50. All right, questions. Your image are super well exposed and dynamic. Do you use luminosity masks in your editing? So I do use luminosity masks. And for anyone who's not sure what luminosity masks are, give me a second. So they're just they're bright. They help you select for highlights and shadows more easily. So let me just show you an example. All right, so you can see that this is light 1, light 2, light 3, and light 4. So this is a luminosity mask I got off an action I got off YouTube, I think 2 years ago. But it's a really great way to show you what they actually are. So what luminosity masks are is it's just brackets of light and shadows. It helps you select, and then you would create a layer mask, and it would help you dodge and burn easier or adjust the specific settings easier. And this really creates selective contrast. I'll show you the darks. So when you see the lights, focus on the highlights. And as you go from, there's different levels that you can select for. And the darks, go for the shadows and the blacks. And also there's different degrees of selection. and you would choose the ones that you personally want to adjust. So let's say you don't really want to adjust the middle highlights, but you only want to adjust the brightest of the whites. So you would go for the lowest luminosity mask, and this would actually select for um, the brightest of the brights, versus let's say you go for this one, which kind of also gets the windows and the ground as well. I do quite a bit of luminosity masks because if you're planning to dodge and burn just using, let's say, a curve layer, you're painting, you have to be very careful with painting, and this takes a lot of effort. You have to, let's say, where's my mouse? All right, so you have to paint really carefully, but with luminosity masks, you don't really need to worry that much because the ones that you select, you won't really need to, let me just show you. So let's say I want to do this one. You would just select for it, which is just Command or Control if you're on a computer. If you're on a PC, you would select for that mask. And when you adjust it, you can see that the shadows aren't really changing. What's actually changing are this little area of the brighter areas, and that's what luminosity masks are so convenient. It saves you a lot of time, but if you're planning to do quality dodge and burning, I would not use luminosity masks. I would just use a curve adjustment layer and paint in the finer details. It's a lot more selective, and you can actually see the difference. Yeah, so that's for luminosity masks. Let me see. Yeah, so yeah, if I ever go to Europe, I'll definitely let you know. Um, like the only place I've ever gone for Europe is actually Iceland. So I'm really hoping to visit more places, like more countries. Norway's on my top of the list. I really, really want to visit all those mountains and nature areas. And Germany's a close second, I think. Switzerland, Austria, all those places. Really, I really wish I could spend like a couple years in Europe. That would be super dope. But let's see, did you crop before or after color correct? Um, I don't really crop at all. I crop at the end before I export an image. So um, let's say I'm editing. I would edit this overall image until it's pretty much done, and then I will crop. Because I like to keep all the details in case I ever need anything. So if I'm just doing a quick preset let's say so if I'm doing, let's say, a quick preset like this, you can tell that this building's not really straight. So if there's no, let's say, if there's no, how do you say it? So if I'm not going to put in 2 hours of my time editing this photo, I would just crop right here. That's more slanted. Yeah. So I would crop right here, and then I would put it into Photoshop. But if I'm going to spend 2 hours and do a really detailed edit, I wouldn't crop at all when I'm importing. I would actually crop at the end, and that's to keep as much details as possible. Because when you crop, you can see that you're losing megapixels, and personally, I don't really like that. But Yeah, that's just that. And for me, if I'm because the photo's actually shot in 4:6, it's not really you can't really post that in for Instagram. So I would crop at the end as well for that as or if you're planning to do a composition, like when I do a composition, I would just do 4:5, and that's Instagram dimensions. But if I'm going to do a full on edit, I would actually finish it and then I would crop it for Instagram posting, I guess. And what you notice is when you crop it for Instagram, the image actually gets less a lot less grand, I guess. So cropping is also something. So you have to also be careful about that because you lose a lot, you lose a big portion of details. So that's why I don't really like cropping. But what can you do, right? Okay, so sharpening an image for Instagram or sharpening in general. You know, one the easiest way is to just if you're using Lightroom or Photoshop, the texture slider, it really brings out the details. So I'll show you the before and after. As you zoom in, you can see a really big difference. And when you use the texture slider and then you combine that with the sharpening, you can get a really sharp image. And it's not going to look too sharp and you're not going to get really strong bands on the side. But I'll just show you the before again and the after. You can really see the details actually pop if you just bring in some texture. I don't normally use clarity because if you do clarity, you're actually going to get a lot of sharp edges, and as you can see here. So I don't recommend doing clarity because what clarity does is it actually makes your image sharp, but it also brings in a bit of contrast, and the contrast actually separates your subject, the focus, and the background, which which isn't really that great. So when I erase texture, I actually lower contrast a bit as well. So you get something like this. And then if you look into the finer details, and what sharpness does is it creates a lot of grain. So you can see that there's a lot of noise and grain here. But because you asked for Instagram, the grain that you're actually because this image is I think 43 megapixels, when you when you zoom in, you can actually see the noise and grain. But if you're exporting for Instagram, you won't really see this at all. So if you're preparing this image for Instagram, I would recommend always over sharpening the image, because once you crop it down and once you size it down, all these background things you would never notice. But if you're doing it for a computer, texture and sharpness should be a lot lower, something like here, but the image is still relatively sharp. Hope that answered your question. Oh, hey man, welcome everybody who just joined. I'm just doing I'm just explaining some Photoshop and answering some questions. So yeah, if you have any suggestions or ideas for future live videos, totally comment that and let me know as well. Would really be fun to try other things and other topics too. But what I have in mind right now is just Saturday will be a educational Photoshop hour, and Sunday will be a edit with me hour. So I think Sunday will be pretty fun if we can all work on um a, an image together, and I'll just explain the different tools and stuff for anyone who's not too sure about Photoshop. I really enjoy Photoshop way more than Lightroom. The funny story is I actually started photography through Photoshop. I was I never really used Lightroom back in the days because I just don't not sh- because I really loved um digital composition. I really thought I was going to be like a digital artist, but for some reason um I ended up needing stock pics. So then I I took a camera and started photographing stuff, and then I was like, oh, I really enjoyed photographing as well, so maybe I should take more pictures. Tried that tried that out, and then um yeah, so I think that was how I actually started, for anyone who was interested. But let's see. Let me see editing on another picture, please. Oh yeah, so this was Quebec City during Christmas. It's if you're ever when all this pandemic is over, if you're thinking of a place to go for winter, this place is like Christmas wonderland. They set up everything to look so holiday and festive. It's it was so beautiful, especially during the night. This actually no, especially during the early mornings. No one wakes up for some reason. So if you come here at, let's say, 6 a.m. in the morning, this you get this whole place to yourself. It's really amazing. And they clean up snow like professionals. In Vancouver, if it snows a little bit, the whole city kind of melts down. But if you're in Quebec and it snows a lot, you wake up in the morning, everything's cleared. I was just so amazed. They have so much machine to just clear snow. In Vancouver, if it snows a tiny bit, it's like the buses are down, like all the parks are down. SkyTrain's not running. The whole city pretty much stops for like the day. But in Quebec, wow, they're on top of their game for that. But yeah, it's just such a beautiful place. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to get the color a bit more correct. I took this image really warm, but I really wanted a kind of like a softer cold blue. Let's see, when you export for Instagram, what format and size do you end up with? When you're exporting for Instagram, you would do 4x5. So, and then what I heard from everyone is the recommended size is 1350. Let me just write that down for you. So it's 1350 by what was it, 980, I think? Was it? Let me just check for you. 1350.25. Oh, no, it's 1350 by 1080. And that's the pixels you would, or the dimension you would export at, and then you would do 72 resolution, because that's what I was told for screen viewing. That's what they view at. But if you're planning to print, you would do as big of a megapixel as possible, so your original megapixel size, and then you would do 300 for resolution, because printers print at 300 dpi, I think. Let's see. Well, see, I think your edit of the Rockies are some of the best in the internet, specifically Lake Louise. I think an interesting video idea would be some insights on how you edit those. Oh, that would be pretty cool too. Thanks for the idea. I'll definitely write that down. Yeah, so every edit is pretty much getting the lighting correct. So for here, you can see that the whole road is kind of lit, and the lights here are lit, and you can see that there's some background lighting here too. So if you can get the lighting correct, you can make an image really pop. But because I'm editing these for stock sites and stuff, I'm not going to put in too much effort. And what I personally like to do is these are the presets I'm currently working on, and I'll push out maybe in the next few weeks. I like to just put on the first one to see how the image looks with color. And then I just make small adjustments to kind of test the mood of the image. And it's a bit too red, so something like that. And what I love about Lightroom or Camera Raw is the gradient. It's a radial, right? It's a radial filter. This is pretty much like dodge and burning, but it's just more on the global scale. You can actually add a little soft light here. Just put exposure up a bit. Something like that. And then see, image feels a bit. And when you're raising this tail here, you can actually create like a really cool vintage feel, I guess, or like a mood. I don't really do this for my 2-hour edits, but I do this if I'm presetting. It really brings out a kind of tone, I guess. You can just add a bit more light. So just add light where you can just add a radial filter to anywhere you think the light is actually shining on, and this is pretty much a really general quick way to dodge and burn, and it will bring layers to your image. I'll just show you the before and the after. You're getting a lot more depth and a lot more control with light. So you can bring up exposure for these areas. You can also bring down exposure. So just lower it a bit. And what I like to do is for any darker areas, I would lower the temperature a bit because all the shadows contain a bit of a blue. So something like that. You can also rotate this, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, so you can see that you're getting a lot more depth. And what I really love about this is that once you apply the preset, you can apply another one. Watch. So this is what it looks like right now. I can bring in a contrast one, and what this does is it makes the image even more contrasty. Or I can bring in a soft one, and this makes the image softer. Or if I want to bring in some split tones, I can do the code, and it brings in this blue feel. Or I can bring in warmth, and it gives it this yellow/orange red feel. Or if I want to have it even more, I can also apply the same preset again. Same thing, you will lower the red and oranges. And what this does is it can create another layer of mood. Let's see. I would like to shoot Niagara Falls sometimes. Do you have any tips for that location? What time of day should I plan to shoot? Do I have to set up my tripod hours in advance to avoid the crowd? Alright, so what I love about Niagara Falls. The people don't really go to Niagara Falls for Niagara Falls. Like, honestly, every time I've been there, if you're going, like even at 8 or 9 in the morning, there's pretty much nobody. everyone's there. I'm not sure. Yeah, so I'm not really sure why, but I'm only talking about the Canadian side, so I'm not too sure about the American side. Canadian side, every morning I went, I was the only one there. And once it gets to like let's say 8 o'clock, I'm there's might be like 10 people. Everyone sleeps in, and the reason why I think is Niagara Falls is pretty much a day trip. So most people actually just drive to Niagara Falls, get some pictures, eat, or have some fun, and then they just come back. So they usually arrive. The crowds normally arrive after breakfast time. So I think like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. That's when it gets really crowded. So if you're going for in the if you're going to the morning, you're really not going to run into much people. Let me just show you. Even at night, at this place, it's not that crowded, and I'm not sure. Maybe I went during the cold season, but I went during autumn and I went during winter, and I stayed there for I think a total of 5 days. The From my experience, every single day hasn't been crowded. I guess I can always find, let's say, like an open area to get a shot like this, and to get a shot like this, you need a 70 to 200. So even with crowds, as long as you can get a spot at the edge, you can totally get a shot like this without any worries. But if you're planning to do a 16 to 35, it's totally fine as well, because um you're going to be somewhere. You're going to be like, to do a 16 to 35, you're probably going to be somewhere here. One sec. Yeah, you're going to be somewhere here, and there's a railing here. You can just if it's crowded, you can just wait, let's say 5 minutes, and someone will probably leave, and then you can just set up your tripod there, and then you can start photographing this area. So you don't really need to worry about crowds. You don't need to set up it hours earlier. But what I do suggest is you should totally go for sunrise. Sunrise at Niagara Falls is amazing. Like, the sun will pop up like in this direction, and the light will come here, and then it would just light up the entire waterfall slowly. Like, it would light up the entire waterfall kind of like from here, starting to go down, and then it will light up everything. It's really amazing. Sunset is pretty cool too. It's not going to really um, change the color of the waterfall, I guess, but it will give you some crazy background. So, like the clouds here, if you get a really good sunset, it's going to be epic. But if I had to choose between sunrise or sunset at Niagara Falls, if you're on the Canadian side, I would do sunrise. Sunrise is probably my favorite here. But another thing to note is, if you're doing sunset, when it gets dark enough, there's light that's going to kind of um, there's going to be light that is actually going to be shined on the waterfall, so it's actually going to be super colorful. It changes colors. And what one thing to be careful, I mean, from my experience, one thing to be careful of is you should take a lot of photographs at the beginning, because that's when the colors are really special. Later on, I think they just alternate the colors between like a rainbow, and they just keep it like that for the rest of the night. I'm not too sure. I stayed there for, I think, 2 hours. The first 15 minutes was, the first 20 minutes, I guess, was really special. It's really, there's like the Canada flag color, and there's some really unique colors as well. But afterwards, they just alternated between rainbows back and forth. So, yeah. Oh yeah, no problem. Thanks for the kind words, man. All right, let's see if there's any Instagram. Yeah, so what I use for editing is Photoshop. I used to use Capture One. It was pretty cool, to be honest, Capture One, but Um, Eventually, I just got a little tired of it. I just thought, yeah, everything can pretty much be done in Photoshop. So I just focused on one software. Like every software is pretty much does the same thing, in my personal opinion. It's just that the what sets Photoshop apart is that you can do a lot of manipulation. So let me just show you what I mean by that. Just give me a quick preset. I'm just gonna quickly preset this. So that's just the wait, this was the mood one. So original image, a quick preset just to bring out the colors. And what I love about Photoshop is that, let me just rasterize. Let's say you want just a bit of light, you know? Like Photoshop's pretty much a painting. You just want a bit of light, you know? You can do this. Versus let's say Lightroom or Capture One or something, you have to do more of a you have to do like this brush thing where you can adjust the highlights and settings and everything. But in Photoshop, you can just make one layer, paint it, and I personally find from my workflow, it's a lot better because let's say you're doing like a million these filter things. And then you're doing these brush ones too, right? It does work, but it feels more generalized versus in Photoshop. Let's say I just want to light up this bar. And you can do that in Photoshop because you can be so selective in here. You know, you just paint over the bar. And then you can see that you can be super, super selective. And what's important, and you can see that when it's not painted, it's something like that. But once you paint the bars, it pops. You're going to see that it's just that tiny bit of added light made this image so much more different, because without it, you won't be looking here. But once you add that selective brightness here, you can just tell that your eyes would actually look at the railing of the house. And that's why Photoshop is amazing. It allows you to be so much more precise versus Lightroom, like let's say. But Lightroom, you can zoom in and do that, but it's just a lot. I mean, I think you can, but I think Photoshop just does it a lot better. Let's see, how the final product change if I use Lightroom instead of Photoshop. Yeah, so Lightroom is more for global adjustments. So if you want to edit this whole image all together, but what Photoshop does is lets you do selective adjustments, or I can even, let's see. All right, I'll show you something even more crazy. I can, oh, just for fun. I can do a double exposure, something like that. Like you can, like anything you can imagine, you can create in Photoshop. You know, I can do like a half Mount Fuji, half waterfall kind of edit. You know. Let's see. Actually, I'm probably going to combine. yeah, so I hope that answered your question, but yeah, hey everyone that's joining. Thanks everyone for the kind words. Really appreciate it. Let's see. Yeah, Lightroom definitely has a brush, but it's the brush is from my memory. I haven't used Lightroom for maybe 2 years now, but from my memory, the brush is something like this, right? This is a brush, and you can go really small, but it's just, let's say I just want this branch to light up. Like you can definitely just do that, right? But it's just it's not as convenient as Photoshop, I guess. Like you can totally do that, but if you think you how do you oh yeah, there's the eraser and then just erase the edges. But for Photoshop, it's just if I want to light up that branch, you can just make a layer mask, a curve adjustments, and same thing like what I did in Camera Raw, just paint it, and afterwards you just paint the other sides as well. So just for my workflow, I guess it's a lot better. And let's say later, let's say I want to then remove the sign. Like I can remove signs, dodge and burn everything, and it's like really quick. Versus Lightroom, it's not as quick. And then what I like about this is the way I can control my entire monitor, as well as the overall adjustments. And because I can make another layer, so let's say I made a layer, I removed this, and suddenly I realized I didn't really like it, I can just go back. Alright, so what is the most difficult part of your post-production process? So the most difficult part of post for me is actually figuring out how to do an image, because there's a lot of times where when you see an image, you're not too sure of how to actually edit it. Like for this image, let me just show you the before. Actually, let's go here. Yeah, so for this image, before I actually even edited, this is how it looked, and I wasn't really sure how to actually do it. But once I figured it out, it was pretty much sharpening the, make the trees pop, and then you give this fade to the top mountains as well as the reflection. And to figure that out, it takes some time and some trial and error. But the overall process, let's say, like the process of creating a photo takes me around an hour to 2 hours. But a lot of times there's trial and error and trying to figure out how the image should look, and that probably takes another hour to 2 hours. So that's probably the most difficult part, because a lot of times the image doesn't turn out the way you want, and it gets a bit frustrating. But through that process, you slowly find the image slowly turning, getting refined. But yeah. Let's see, all right, since the hour's pretty much up, if you have any final questions, you can just ask. If not, I think I'm going to call it here. So so today's live streams going to. I think it's done for today. Um, Tomorrow will be edit with me. If you guys want to decide, I'm thinking. Let's see, what image should we do for tomorrow? Let me see. Oh. Yeah, I'm thinking. We might be doing an Iceland one or a Toronto one, so I'm not too sure yet. But we might be doing this one, but we'll see. Yeah, so tomorrow will be it'll just be an edit with me. We'll be going through Photoshop. If you want to edit along with me, just definitely I'll definitely post about it. And yeah, I'll let you guys know in the stories tomorrow morning or whichever time or before 11 a.m. EST, which photos and what we'll be doing. If you're interested, just hop on. But yeah, I'm going to probably end the stream here for today. Thanks for watching, and yeah.